have a full house. So thank you for coming. Before we begin, let me just take a moment to acknowledge the first Australians, the traditional owners of the land that we meet on, and pay respects to their elders, past and present. Crawford School, the Crawford School is ANU's public policy school, but it also has considerable, wonderful expertise in the region. East Asia, South Asia, the Pacific, China, Southeast Asia, and of course Indonesia. The Indonesia project is something we're very proud of. It arguably is the finest collection of academic scholarship on Indonesia in the world. So no better place, no more appropriate place, and indeed we're so fortunate today to have Ani here. Sri Mulyani thank you for coming. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and it's much appreciated, and we're looking forward to your presentation a great deal. Before I begin, let me just tell you what's going to happen roughly. After the presentation, our own Peter Drysdale is going to handle a question and answer sort of session. If that's okay, that's okay. Very good, thank you. And then Peter will do a thank you and a wrap up. A couple people and organizations to acknowledge before I stop. This event is co-sponsored by the Development Policy Center, the Australia-Indonesia Institute, and the director, Tim Lindsay, is here. Thanks, Tim. Thank you very much. And also, of course, by the Indonesia Project, Budi and Hal and all my colleagues, all my good colleagues in the Art Court and Department of Economics who are part of Crawford. Very happy to have you here today. That's it from me. Please welcome the former Minister of Finance, now Managing Director of the World Bank. Clap again, please, for Sri Mulyani.
Thank you, Tom, and very good afternoon for all of you. It's really, really good and a great pleasure for me to be here with you all. I feel like this is homecoming rather than the official visit. It's my first official visit in a new capacity as a managing director of the bank. So it's really very delighted to see all the familiar faces and friends here. Of course, to be polite to Tom also and Peter, I would like to thank Development Policy Center and Indonesian Project of the Australia National University and the Australia-Indonesia Institute of the Development of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that is a very long title, for hosting us today. This is a little bit strange because, as you know, last week Bob Zulik was here and now the managing director here. Suddenly Australia became the very popular destination of the bank. I think you all know why. Because we have a strong partnership with the bank. And in this case, has been tested in many different occasions. First, I think on a disaster management, the World Bank worked together with the state and federal government to actually support how to handle and tackling the challenge posed of the flood, which is devastating Queensland. This is the area which the bank now focusing more and more on what you call it, the post-disaster management. It is not only because the frequency, but also in terms of the quality of disaster, natural disaster everywhere in the world. And the second one also, you all know that here the recent independent aid effectiveness review, and certainly bank as the development institution have a very strong interest and important in really like looking the policy as well as the goals of the Australian government who allocate and increase the amount of resource for the international aids. You do have the interest to see the resource will be well allocated, will achieve the effective result, and that is the mutual objective and also the goals of the institution like the bank. But most importantly, actually also the mutual goals which is want to be achieved by many of the receiving country. So there are quite a lot of strong commitment as well as the common goals that want to be achieved by seeing all the resources well spent, linked with the result, and can be communicated well to the international audience. This is part of what we call it the good governance and accountability at the international institution, as well as in terms of the way we operate. Today I was asked to talk about the G20, which is actually more relevant to my previous job. So I think the Australians really want to hear me more on my previous job rather than the one. But okay, I will try to accommodate that a little bit. But we are now in a very interesting, but also at the same time important environment and development. We tend to call it is already post-crisis, because even within the bank, since spring's last year, spring meeting 2010, we've already have what we call it the post-crisis direction. Eventually the crisis is coming again. So it's now become the management. The recovery of the global economy is there. It is patchy and also uneven. Developing country recover very well, but developed country suddenly now facing a very, very difficult environment. Remind all of us, especially coming from developing and emerging country, our own crisis back a decade ago or 2 decades ago in many of the Latin America, Asia. So we watch and we look at this, and certainly it will affect in terms of the sustainable global recovery, which we are all actually expect back in 2008. Why 2008 is very important? I think this is linked to the G20 issue. The G20 forum is actually created post the ASEAN crisis back in 97-98. As you all remember, that ASEAN crisis came as a surprise because it hits what you call it the poster country who adopted a good sound policy, and suddenly they just hit by the crisis. And for Indonesia, it's even very devastating. It costs a lot of money to recover, to build out the financial system. Our economy contracted more than 13.5% to be exact. Inflation hit 80%. The exchange rate collapsed, more than 75% depreciation. So it was really a devastating situation. But Indonesia is only one among many countries in ASEAN at that time. That crisis gave us a lot of lesson learned. And since then, there is an initiative of the finance minister and central bank governor to actually try to get together to establish what they call it the G20 by picking the member. It's not really by the size, I think, but more by the representative of each continent. We have in Asia, in which represented by Indonesia, China, South Korea, and then we also have Japan, Australia. I will consider Australia as part of ASEAN now. You will actually glad to be part of ASEAN now, I'm sure. And then we have from Latin America, we have from North America, we have from Middle East, and also from Africa. It's not really a country which is identified as a prominent, but it seems that they are identified as more systematically important country in each of the region. So this G20 was started after 98 crisis, financial crisis, and become a routine forum for the finance minister and central bank governor to discuss about policy challenge, exchange view, sometime in this case even exchange informations. We even discuss some of what you call it the trade-off policy. I joined the G20 as a finance minister starting in 2006, of course, at that time. And then within the couple of years, when the 2008 crisis closed, that is 2007, you can hear that the presentation, especially by the finance minister from developed country, from the United States, Tim Geithner, or the James Hank Paulson to Tim Geithner at that time, showing that there is a worrying sign of development in the United States, bubble in the asset, and of course the spending, which has never been checked both by the household, private sector, and the government. So when the crisis hit in 2008, it was so fast, so devastating. And I guess there is no leader in the world at that time have a confidence enough to say that we are going to be safe from this crisis, post-Lehman situation. Some leaders try to talk each other. I know that at that time Gavin Rudd have a phone call with George Bush and also call President Yudhoyono. And then they want to have a meeting at the leaders level. So the finance minister also called each other because we said that what is the right forum for the leader to meet in order to address and to respond coordinatedly on this, facing with this, the world challenge of global financial crisis. So this G20 leaders meeting was created because finance minister said that, well, the only forum which is logical, because we've already have the traditional meeting and at least we are familiar with the challenge itself, which is dominated by financial issue, is the G20. So then, because at that time, even when you start to could we meet only 12 of us or 15? Is 20 is too many, or it is just, or we should add more member in this case? But the political leader at that time have no time to actually randomly or ad hocly to add or to reduce the member of this G20. So they just accept the G20. So it is really a coincidence or driven by the crisis. But it has become very important because then all the preparation of what you call it, the policy discussion among the finance minister and central bank governor is created or preparing or provided with quite an initial discussion at the political leaders or head of state level. I remember the first meeting was in Washington, and this is hosted by the outgoing president, President Bush. But it's even in this case, we don't care about incoming or outgoing because time is in essence. That was in the middle of all this, the financial panic, the whole world, the liquidity dry up, everybody tried to save their own economy. They have to look each other. Each of the finance ministers busy in calling each other. In ASEAN, I talked to many of the finance ministers saying that if you change the policy, please inform us because we don't want to lag behind. For example, when Malaysia announcing blanket guarantee, the Singapore has not been informed yet, so they suddenly have to adopt the same policy in order not to create a disadvantage and panic behavior. And then Tharman called me that he said that, Mulyani, we are going to announce an hour from now that we are going to adopt. Australia is already moved a little bit early on that. And that's create a pressure for a country like Indonesia because everybody adopting blanket guarantee and Indonesia is not adopting it because we have the trauma back in 97, 98. So the situation is such that creating a pressure, but most important is actually G20 was created in order to restore confidence and reestablish confidence to the global financial system. I guess you will not underestimating when the confidence and trust is not there. There is no transaction in the world can be done, and I guess there is no market mechanism can work when the trust and confidence is not there. So that is the highest, most important focus for the meeting of the G20, both in Washington as well as in London after that as the next host. Now, looking back at that, I think it is rightly that the policy priority on the first year of G20 is really focusing on how to rescue the global economy, how to establish the recovery, and then we will want to move on, and of course, rebuilding the global economy. The situation in 2008, from the policy coordination point of view, is actually much easier comparing to today. I will say much easier because the whole world, regardless whether you are low-income country, middle-income country, high-income country, you are all facing exactly the same threat. The crisis of confidence, the contraction of the economy, the liquidity problem because no one wants to transact each other, financial crisis in some area, and it is then affected the performance of the economy in terms of the contraction. And that's why the policy response at that time was only one direction. Every country will try to do the counter-cyclical. So you can see that the coordination can be easily reached during the London meeting by saying that all countries will use all the instrument, the resource, the mechanism, just to make sure that you are going to be effectively minimize the contraction of the economy due to the global financial crisis back in 2008. So you can predict and you can see that that's the policy response. On the monetary side, they are all totally expansionary loosening. Fiscal side, they are all totally expansionary loosening in order to do the coordinated counter-cyclical. The result was amazing. If you look at 2009 and early 2010, the whole global economy is almost can claim that the recovery is there. Until last year, actually, the global economy is quite optimistic that we are in the path of recovery. Then, of course, after 2008, and because of this policy response, coordinated massively, you name it, China is spending 100 billion to do the counter-cyclical. Even Indonesia, at that time, we also talked to the parliament, provided with a special article on the budget law that will allow the government to spend more in order to rescue the economy. Many other countries also doing everything. The World Bank role is actually very critical at that time. We tripling our lending in order to help many developing countries in order to be able to do this counter-cyclical policy on their fiscal side. So this coordinated effort globally has been very effective. It creates confidence, it restores confidence, and it supports the recovery. Then the result of this policy coordination is not only on the positive side. There is an access, just like medicine maybe. If you are doing on the right measure scale, you are going to cure the symptom or the disease, but maybe there isn't a side effect. Policy, economic policy is the same. You do the coordinated in order for you to tackle the contraction, it creates the side effect. Some country is really pressing with the inflationary pressure because demand has been pushed very, very strongly everywhere. Domestic demand, then create confidence, and then export has been recovered very strongly. So many of developing countries especially then face this excess of policy back in 2008, 2009, 2010. Many of them now suffering from the inflation. Liquidity is huge, plenty everywhere. And this is the classical definition. When money chasing goods, then you have inflation. Money chasing property, you have the asset bubble. Money chasing stock, then you have this stock everywhere. The prices just increase. So this is the result of that crisis or response back in 2008, 2009, coordinated among other by the G20 and then also supported by the Bretton Woods institution like the IMF World Bank. And now the question is the challenge, because you are asking about what is going to be the G20, the relevance of this forum, especially now facing with this situation. If you try to look at the 2010, not only that inflation in general increased, but the commodity price is also increasing. Food price is becoming very high and volatile. And that backfire many of the development goal which is already achieved before the crisis. The crisis itself cost us quite a lot in terms of the development goals. With this now inflation, food price, commodity price, oil price, they multiply the difficulty of all countries who try their best to achieve their development progress. And this is the current challenge. In addition to this situation which is now challenging, the policy response is not going to be also easy. Different to the 2008 situation in which one threat, one unified threat, and then you need one unified coordinated policy action, regardless your level of economy. This 2010 and 11 is actually demanding a much, much more complicated policy response. First, you don't have, or many of the countries has already reached the limit in terms of their ability to intervene at the macro level without creating the question of sustainability at the macro policy, or what you call it, the prudent macroeconomic policy framework. United States, European have a debt to GDP ratio which is very high. The deficit has been very chronic. Many of the countries, I deal with the three regions, in this case Latin America, Caribbean, Middle East, and East Asia Pacific. They've already increased their deficit back in 2009, 2010. Now they have to consolidate their fiscal policy, meaning that they have to reduce the deficit, and that is going to be the policy that need in order for them to be able to at least maintain their budget in a healthy or sustainable way. Monetary policy have to consolidate because the inflation become very high. So we call it the normalization both at the monetary and fiscal policy. So what is the policy option left for many policymakers in the world? It's the third option, which is the most difficult part, because it is linked to the political support and have the huge political dimension. That is structural policy. Because you can no longer sustain the global economy and support the global economic and growth by using excessively your monetary and fiscal policy. In order for the economy to be able to increase the welfare in a more sustainable way, supported by improvement in their productivity, you have to address the issue of the structural problem in your own country. And that is really not easy. First, even at the macro level, you are doing the unpopular policy option. Telling the politician and the public that you are going to cut your budget is not really an easy job. I was there, believe me, it's not easy. When you have to tell, and you expect that you can negotiate by telling in a cabinet that I think we need to cut the budget and you're spending by 20%. Wow. All your cabinet members suddenly become your enemy. You become the only one. Try to convince your cabinet colleague member or the president first, of course. And then the second one, you have to convince your parliamentary member to support that policy. And then you have to communicate to the media and the people. It's going to be very, very difficult. This is not only in Indonesia. That's why I'm not envying any job of the Minister of Finance now. There, in European and United States. That they really have to do this very unpopular job. And this is exactly like when you talk about cutting the spending, which spending, how much. Each of the spending have their own constituent. And they're always telling you, this is just remind me, every time you try to cut the budget, all the ministry can come to you and convince you that their spending is the most important, the most strategic, the most, area that need to be defense. Somebody else can be sacrificed, but not us. So it can be in a many different expressions, but that is exactly the same. So this is the situation that you are having. You have to cut the budget while at the same time you have to maintain and improve your productivity. You have to improve the infrastructure. You have to invest in terms of changing or creating the environment for the public institution to become more efficient. They are not become the part of the problem of the economy. So you have to reform them. And then you have to make sure that every dollar you spend is going to have the result. So it's just reminding me from the earlier speech that the result and performance of each spending is become more and more important, not only from the point of view of accountability now, but it's become very important and imperative for surviving of the economy. The policy option is becoming very complicated. For some developing country, you have to consolidate addressing the inflation problem, while at the same time you are still facing with the employment which is very high. For many developing countries, is even combined with the issue of poverty, infrastructure which is still lag behind, and in this case you have to make sure that the poorest and the poor can be protected from the volatility of the food price. So now the question is, what issue is still important for the G20 to be discussed? And I think this is exactly what I at that time, because since the London meeting in G20, and then back to the United States, because President Obama entering the office and said, well, you know, the first G20 is just a default G20. That was George Bush. Now I'm the president, I want to host this G20. So the G20 moved again to the United States, which is maybe rightly choice in the sense that the source of the problem is United States. So they should become the host, so everybody will look at it. But it's very clever for the United States to become the host of this G20, that they are not only putting the topic of the financial crisis. So the second part of the G20, we're discussing starting with more development issue. It is, I mean, this is really not a forum which you have the secretariat, which then deciding and preparing what agenda need to be discussed at the leader level. I heard from Peter that you have the G20 meeting of everybody last week. So some of the Sherpa is there. The question is, at that time when President Obama hosted G20, he picked the topic which is non-financial crisis, that is on energy, and that is related to subsidy, because this is linked to the climate change. I'm not going to talk about climate change here because it's but that was the situation, and each country have to present which is related. At that time was justified, not only that the climate change become the issue, but also in this case because a lot of countries in the world, even the poorest country, actually spending a lot of money for the energy subsidy. And the question is whether that is the right spending, and can we use the same amount of money for a better spending? That is the policy choices. So starting from the Pittsburgh meeting, actually G20 evolved into the forum at the leaders level, although the debate among the leaders is asking about who will decide what agenda for a meeting. At that time, the question also asked whether it is important or needed by the G20 to have a secretariat, the permanent secretariat, in order to actually organize, manage, and sort what is the highest priority. I don't know, because I never involved with the G20 anymore. The bank is certainly always invited, but the World Bank actually entering this environment as well as the evolution of G20 in a very nice way, because the issue of development become the main menu. The leaders, when they meet, they don't want to just talk about financial crisis, especially when it is starting by saying that we are going to adopt the Basel III. Why the president have to think about what is this Basel III? What is the macroeconomic prudential? What is the micro? And they can make a good speech, every president saying that the bankers should bear this responsibility. That is a good political statement. But when talking about the detail, that is not at the leader's level. Leaders want to have a discussion which matters a lot for the global economy to be recovered and to be sustainable in terms of the progress and improvement. And that's the area in which then the development agenda become the issue in the G20. And the World Bank has become an institution which is really fit very well. It justifies in a couple of different aspects. First, because the World Bank is going to connect G20 with the G187. Of course, it's nice being a member of this exclusive club, G20. I think Indonesia enjoying very much. Oh, we become the exclusive class. But you should not think about if you are become a member, you will enjoy this exclusivity and privilege. But what is the view of the non-G20, which is actually they are equally important, and they may have quite a lot of lesson learned. They may also have a lot of opportunity, and even in this case, they have an influence in shaping the global economy as well, and even shaping the global policy. But as I said earlier, the default of G20 was actually dictated by the crisis. If you try to start opening up whether this G20 is the right G20, you will never actually get the right forum to discuss about it. So the G20 has become just G20. But the most important is try to link this G20 with the wider, because the leaders, even at the G20, definitely have the concern, legitimate concern, to actually giving a leadership, economic leadership for the global economy in order to make sure that the recovery, in this case, and the global economy will be inclusive, sustainable, and so on. And that is why then the bank is supporting very strongly. And that also fit very well with our own work in the bank, in which we also try to shape our own strategy in dealing with many middle-income countries. Believe me that bank was very, very experienced in dealing with many low-income countries, poverty at the low-income country. But when you are dealing with the middle-income country, suddenly bank is actually facing with the client which is much bigger than they are. If we are like standing here in front of China, the client is much, much bigger than us. So what is the value added that we should add? If we are standing here in front of India, we are much smaller. We only land at the crisis level is around 35 billion a year. Now we have to go down to the 15 billion. For the IBRD plus IDA will be around 54 billion. That is a small money comparing to the size of GDP or even the size of the budget of those middle income countries. Even at the Indonesian standard, the bank operation is actually becoming very, very small. So how the small institution, can still influence and stand there? That is the challenge for the bank in this case. But we also become a knowledge bank. So our leverage is not only in money, but most importantly in the knowledge and experience that we have. And this is exactly why it fits well the G20 when the issue development become the main agenda. What is the area that is the main concern now becoming the highest priority for the leader to discuss? First, food. Of course, at that time, all the leaders said that, well, we cannot actually ask the people to wait when this is related to food. Food security, the price volatility of food is becoming the big challenge. And that is why the bank, and during our annual meeting last year, we actually take this theme in which put food first. And that's become also one of the agenda which is adopted by the G20. I think the agriculture finance minister is the agriculture minister on the G20 is also discussing about that. Energy prices still become the concern, but that is going to be also affected with the issue of the climate change. And that link very well with the climate change, energy price, and also in this case in terms of the strategy, which will link with the development challenge in general. The third issue is related to infrastructure development. We talk a lot about infrastructure, but there is still the discussion regarding how we can really use, especially for many emerging countries, especially here in Asia, in which you have a capital surplus, you have huge reserve. But ironically, you're not using that to build your own infrastructure. I was in Jakarta last week after I visited my daughter's graduation. And I was amazed with the traffic. You can actually stay in the same location for 30 minutes without moving. And I said, and I discussed with a couple of my friends telling that, well, this is remind us like Bangkok before they really build this infrastructure. And some of the people even joking and saying that I think we are going to catch up with the Bangkok situation in which the stuck of the traffic not only now on a 2 hour, 3 hour, you can have like 7 hour. And you know, my friends, the expatriate told me, "Si Mulyani, you better invest now by buying the portable toilet in Jakarta. Because you can stuck 7 hours in the same position." I think that's going to be, I mean, this is just to reflect a problem, which is a good problem because showing a progress. People becoming richer, the middle class is thicker, they are buying car, they are buying motorcycle, but the infrastructure is like behind, whether you are talking about the electricity shortage or the road shortage. And that's the area which we in this case, the bank is also fit well and try to support. The other one, which is also adopted on the G20, is the financial inclusion. Everybody recognizes that small, medium enterprise is very important, but you actually understand that still million and million people have no access to the financial. So for them to be able to even settle a bill for water, for electricity, they will take an effort and cost time as well as money. So financial inclusion, whether this is for their convenience or for the economic empowerment, is becoming very important. So that's on the G20. The last topic is about where the role of Indonesia, or maybe I can call it the emerging country in general, within this G20. To be honest, to be part of this exclusive club is one thing. It's enjoyable. You suddenly now sit at the same table with the United States, with Angela Merkel, with Sarkozy, and all those things. Oh, we are at the same table. It's nice. But the next question is actually, what role do you want to play there? And that's exactly now, this is the challenge of many developing countries. It is good for them to be exposed in this international fora, because then the international audience will wait for what is this emerging country, including Indonesia, to say in this forum. And you cannot attend this kind of international forum just telling that, oh, our country is good. Believe me, we have a lot of good story about us. Or they are coming to this kind of forum by only just sharing about, oh, I have a lot of problem. My problem. Because you are in this forum, you are expected by the non-member who see this club as a group of economic leadership who should think about a problem beyond their own. And I can assure you it is really a tough situation. When I was finance minister, I said, well, 99.9% of my time is actually dealing with the domestic issue. whether reforming the tax, whether to explain when my staff is still committing something which is become the headline, whether it's related to the custom, whether you are dealing. So there are so many things that actually overwhelm you. And how can we still spare time or even thinking energy to think about the global issue? And I can assure many of the finance ministers will prefer not to attend that one because they've already have a lot of work to do. But this is exactly the challenge of many developing or emerging countries, which is the member of the G20. It will be very even difficult because the institution at the emerging and developing countries still in the process of to be built, the competency, the capacity. At the finance minister in Indonesia, when the G20 becoming permanent, become the leader forum, I said that, well, we have to establish the unit within the finance minister who dedicate only to talk about the G20. And then I found who's going to be there? No one. So I asked the Australian to help me. Thank you very much for your help. I asked the World Bank to help me. I asked who's the PhD graduate in the Ministry of Finance. Give me all the list of the PhD graduate. I get all the list. This one is almost retired. This never actually. So you really have to be very creative in terms of how can I recruit the academician and all those things. Even the academician, it's not all of them really interested with the international issue. Because they are not that popular in Indonesia. You become a frequent guest of TV if you talk about domestic issue, not the international issue. That's create a distorted incentive of many of our academicians. I'm sure that many Indonesians here, when they are back, they are not talking about Australian anymore. They just talk about Indonesia. So it's really difficult to create that. Even at the University of Indonesia, I know that we have the center, but I was the head of the Research Institute LPM in University of Indonesia. You will not expect a better university in Indonesia rather than University of Indonesia, of course. But, of course, I'm not saying, no. But I have a lot of friends from Gajah Mada, which is equally good, I guess. But even with that, if you ask the minister, Gajah Mada University, University of Indonesia, you name it, there is no one really actually have the interest, even the ASEAN. We are the biggest ASEAN member, Indonesia, but you ask if there are any expert on ASEAN, I only remember one name, that is late Hadi Susastro. Until he passed away, there is no recruitment on the younger generation. So you can imagine that this is going to be. While Indonesia is very proud to become the member of G20. But you can come to the forum without nothing, right? You have to prepare something. So this is going to be the issue. I think this is just a homework. That's why I'm glad to be here, to be invited by you all to talk about this one. Because this is going to be the homework that I will put it back to you. You can actually help a lot. Australia, in this case, is a very, very strong in terms of the role in the G20, is a very good friend of Indonesia. You help a lot of many countries. In this case, in capacity building. This is really an opportunity for the Australia to create a strong partnership, whether you will do it bilaterally with a country like Indonesia, which you've already did and you are continuing doing it, or through the multilateral institution like the bank. Either or is equally good. Because I'm not in the bank, so I have to say this is equally good. So with that, I think this is going to be the challenge for many middle-income countries, and this is exactly one of the topics in which we try at the bank to create and to establish the forum of many of the middle-income country members of the bank to actually elevate their presence globally so that they will be able to play the international role. Believe me that the development lesson is actually everywhere. The teaching of the recipe of development is no longer from North country to the South country. Many of development lessons is actually coming from South. When you talk about social safety net, we learn from Brazil, we learn from Mexico, from Bolsa Familia becoming the conditional cash transfer. It is adopted in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Morocco. So all learning about when the economy and the country hit by the shock, how to protect the poor. We can learn. We can learn quite a lot in terms of how we can build the project which is carrying equally important the environmental aspect, the indigenous people, the social participation. And that's why the South-South learning is becoming very, very important. And this is the call for many of the developing countries, emerging countries, to play their international role. The last one I want to conclude that this will require the change of the mind, the mindset, and the attitude of many emerging and developing countries. You are no longer expected to become just the passive recipient or becoming the whining member of international community. You should become or have the confidence, but at the same time also responsibility to shape the global policy. You can do it in an articulate way, in a constructive way, so it will make this world to become a place for all of us to live peacefully, prosperously, and justly. Thank you very much.